Istanbul, where we're not quite finished yet with day one, because at meetings like this we always start early and go late, but we're close to concluding day one of the first ever World Humanitarian Summit. I'm here along with two great colleagues of the UN Foundation, who you'll hear from shortly, but also with over 5,000 other participants who are here in Istanbul from 170 countries. This includes more than 65 heads of state and government. This is a number that went up significantly just over the last few days, but also a strong showing from all of the sectors that are critical to be more engaged if we're going to have more effective response to the issues that Elizabeth just laid out. So we have people here from aid organizations, the private sector, civil society, and affected communities. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon is here along with a number of other UN leaders. He opened the summit this morning with a powerful call to action telling us we are one humanity with a shared responsibility. Let us resolve here and now not only to keep people alive, but to give people a chance at life and dignity. So that's the rally cry we're all taking into the next day of activity here in Istanbul. There's a lot happening here. In addition to the official proceedings of the summit, there are over 100 side events which have been a chance to drill down on particular topics that need more focused attention. These events have covered a range of issues from preventing and ending conflict to humanitarian financing to addressing issues related to gender and health. And some of the common threads that have stuck with me so far are to really focus on putting people at the center of our work. I think this is a great way of thinking about how to unite the conversation that's happening here with all of the important discussions that have happened over the last year and more than that really on the sustainable development and climate agendas. Because if you put people at the center and think about the solutions that are needed to make people's lives better, it's a way to bring us all together, I think, and to do more together. So I just wanted to highlight a few of the things that have already come out of just day one of the summit, and then I will turn over to Nancy and Davis to fill in everything I missed as much as possible in a really quick update we're doing here from Istanbul. But just a few things, again, that were announced today. First, global leaders came together to launch Education Cannot Wait. This is a new fund to educate children in emergencies. And we, of course, know that 50% of refugee children are in primary schools, so we have a lot further to go in this regard. Second, there was an important session on innovative financing commitments, and we saw increases to the UN Central Emergency Response Fund, or CERF. So we hope that the number of funds available for quick response to emergencies will go up over the coming months and years. And we'll see a number of, I think, interesting new initiatives coming out on the financing front, including, I also understand, a commitment to a humanitarian impact bond, I think put forward by the government of Belgium. Final announcements of the summit was the announcement of a new grand bargain, where donors have agreed to provide more reliable, flexible funding for humanitarian response, something that's critical. And aid organizations have agreed to improve efficiency and transparency. So we expect a lot. There's, of course, a lot more that happened today, a lot more that will happen tomorrow before we leave. But I think everyone here in Istanbul also has a really real sense of the fact that, of course, are not going to be solved here. They are part of a longer arc of activity on the humanitarian agenda throughout this year, and much more that's needed beyond this year. So we're not here with the sense that we're going to solve these complicated questions overnight, but as the Deputy Secretary General Jan Eliasson said in a briefing to reporters yesterday, Istanbul is not the end point, it's a turning point, a chance for all of us to set a new direction, and I think that is what's happening here. So I'd like to turn this over to our two panelists, and hopefully this will all work smoothly. First, Nancy Lindborg, the president of the U.S. Institute of Peace. Nancy, among a range of issues, focuses on how to reduce risks for violent conflict and build resilience in communities. So Nancy, what have you heard here today on the topics that you focus on in your current role, and what stood out as something that needs more attention, but also is a potentially transformative new way of doing business?
Great, thanks Susan, and hello everybody back in Washington. Great to be here, and thank you to the UN Foundation. And it's a good thing that you have several of us, because there is so much going on. There are all the simultaneous roundtables and side events and marketplaces. And I would agree with you, Susan. I do think that there is a sense that as the first summit, there is a coalescing around a lot of critical core concepts that the humanitarian community has worked with and promoted for a long time, but there is a dialing in, and especially amid the sense of extraordinary urgency that we're all facing today. I've focused on two key pieces of this summit, the first being the collective commitments around preventing and ending conflict. There was a roundtable with country commitments this morning, and countries like Somalia, Mali, Tunisia all spoke about their commitments to using dialogue as a means of managing conflict so that it doesn't become violent, their commitments to adhere to the peace agreements that have been or are being negotiated. Obviously, for this set of issues, when you've got 80% of humanitarian assistance going to crises caused by violent conflict, this is absolutely core. They are less tangible commitments than we saw coming out of some of the other activity streams, and an area where we still need a lot of effort to figure out how to monitor, how to uphold, what are the mechanisms. There were a number of countries that complained about the Security Council. So it's felt much more like an opening set of conversations that hopefully will continue to move us forward with increased urgency. The second area was around humanitarian financing, because this is where there were a lot of very specific commitments, including the Grand Bargain, that enable us to really move forward on a number of issues that will determine how we're able to get upstream, both from disaster and conflict, through this additional focus on investments in local action, in greater efficiency and effectiveness in our humanitarian assistance. And this is where follow-up action in Washington will be absolutely critical, because there are a number of these issues that we in Washington, through Congress, through how the administration works, will be absolutely key. And then the final point I would make is that what's been really important about this summit is the inclusiveness, as you said, Susan, of having at some of these tables member states plus private sector plus civil society, and I would add youth. There are 200 youth activists who have been involved with this summit, and they have a really palpable excitement. Their energy and understanding that they have an ability to change the world through what they do, not just today but into the future, is really infectious. And I think that all of us are especially looking at what comes after this. This will be a continued conversation, but the collective coalescing around a number of critical commitments and ideas is what will be, I think, paving the pathway forward and provide a lot of energy for all of us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nancy. That was a great update and heartening, and I think the involvement of youth is something we need to carry forward to every meeting like this and every discussion that happens on these issues and more. And you mentioned the strong multi-stakeholder component of this summit. It was something that was a priority of the UN all along, and it very much impacted the way that these couple of days were organized. So I want to turn to Davis, the founder and CEO of Cotopaxi, which is an outdoor gear company with a mission of social impact. Davis is also a member of the UN Foundation's Global Entrepreneurs Council, so that's part of the reason he's here, I suspect. But Davis, what made you, as a leader from the private sector, decide to prioritize coming to Istanbul for 2 days focused on the humanitarian agenda? And And I know you have to run to another event this evening, so maybe also talk a little bit about what you heard today as it relates to the role of the private sector in humanitarian response.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great to be here, and thank you, Susan, for allowing me to participate in this conversation as a member of the private sector. And so, there's a number of reasons I came to Istanbul to participate in this historic event. And I'd say the first is that sometimes as business leaders, we don't often understand what it takes to have the best results, and so we need help. The private sector needs to shift our mentality from corporate social responsibility to corporate social results. And to get the results, we have to understand what the target is. And so that's one of the reasons I'm here. Also, as a recently appointed member of the Global Entrepreneurs Council, I really want to take advantage of the 2 years that I have and try to make the biggest impact that I can in that role. And so that's one of the reasons I'm here as well. I also wanted to support the IRC, which is a partner of Cotopaxi, along with the Tend Alliance, which is a new alliance that's been formed by the Chobani Foundation. It has a mission that's basically committed to ending the refugee crisis, to encouraging companies to get involved in these efforts, and also to help collaboration between in the private sector. And the last reason I'm here is really I believe that companies have a moral obligation to help shift public perception about the refugee crisis through education and through awareness, and so that's something that I feel I can do. The second part of your question, Susan, just around some of the things that I've seen here. So, I think I've been surprised at how much they've involved the private sector, which I think is fantastic. The reality is that there are 60 million refugees and IDPs around the world, and NGOs and governments can't do this alone. We need a unified response, and so the private sector, we have the ability to help in that area. So the TEM Foundation recently published a study that said for every dollar that governments put into refugees, they can have a $2 output within 5 years. But that's assuming that there's employment for these refugees, and the only way that happens is through the private sector. And so, the private sector can help, of course, through philanthropy, writing checks, through corporate engagement, which is mobilizing our customer bases or using skill-based volunteerism of our own employees, and also through thought leadership, and then but also through corporate governance. So this is we have a large web that we can affect through our supply chains and other things. So helping through skills transfer in other areas. So I loved a couple of the sessions that I've been to. One was about migrants and humanitarian action. So we heard Ruma speak from the Chobani Foundation, and she talked about how the private sector can take risks that the NGOs can't take. We can move faster, and we can use the entrepreneurial spirit to solve problems in a really unique way. David Miliband, the CEO of the IRC, also spoke and talked about how success needs to be measured not simply on our ability to allow people to survive, but on ensuring that people can thrive. And so that's an area that I think the private sector understands and wants to be involved in. We just need, we're not experts in the humanitarian space, we're not experts in the nonprofit world. We know how to run businesses and organizations, but we needed the help of the nonprofit world to help us understand how we can help and how we can get involved.
Well, thank you, and thanks again for being here. And I think there'll be another couple of exciting announcements on the private sector front tomorrow as well, which we'll make sure to get out to the world as they happen. So Nancy, if I could turn back to you, and then we'll pretty soon be wrapping up this end of the programming, so we can allow all of you in DC to dive into the discussion. You mentioned some significant announcements that are happening on the financing front, which is great news. But we know at the same time we also need to be doing more with the financing that is available, given the very significant gaps that we have now in terms of what is needed to really address the situation at hand. So, do you have any thoughts on the effectiveness of humanitarian aid? Anything that's happening here that allows us, gets us to this notion of doing more with hopefully more, but also acknowledging we need to make better use of the resources we have.
Well, there were commitments on both sides of that equation, commitments of countries who pledged to do more financially, and very importantly, as you mentioned, Susan, the announcement of the Grand Bargain, which was 16 countries, 3 NGO networks, the Red Cross, Red Crescent family, and 15 different UN agencies. And if all of the pieces of the Grand Bargain are actually able to go forward, this could be game-changing in terms of our ability to be more effective. It does everything from make commitments around increased transparency, longer-term, more flexible funding, more harmonious reporting. Very importantly, tearing down some of the stovepipes between relief and development approaches, support for a World Bank financing platform that would give concessional loans to middle-income countries. And these are the kinds of pieces that help us really transform how we do what we do, so that we help to build the resilience. It helps us to get ahead of disasters that we shouldn't be surprised are happening, or conflicts that have been going on for decades or more. And that kind of shift, a lot of us, many people have talked about. These aren't necessarily new ideas, but bringing them together in that kind of collected package with that many member states, UN agencies, and NGOs all making that commitment is really potentially, groundbreaking. And that's where our follow-up energy would be well placed to make sure that those really core ideas take root. And the fact that there was all of this collective energy brought together, it is an extraordinary moment, at a moment of great urgency. And how we carry that forward is really everybody's responsibility.
Well, thank you so much. And I think we've seen time and time again that sometimes we just need the right opening and the right coalition of actors to come together to take forward the good ideas that we all know we should be supporting. So hopefully this is one of those moments. And we do, of course, know that the role of the U.S. government and the entire Washington community is critical in continuing to push this agenda forward. So with that, I will turn the discussion back to our Elizabeth and our colleagues in Washington, and I hope we gave you good food for thought, but we're looking forward to hearing about what I'm sure will be a great discussion there as well. So thank you so much. I'm glad this worked out, and we'll keep you posted.
Thank you.